My name is Owen, 34 years old, and until last month, I would have done anything for my sister Natalie. We lost our parents young, and I've spent my life making sure she had everything she needed. So when I got that notification $28,000 charged to my credit card for her wedding reception, I couldn't believe it. The betrayal stung worse than the money. What happened next changed our relationship forever, but not how you might expect. Before I continue, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I handled the biggest family betrayal of my life. Growing up, Natalie and I were all each other had. I was 12 and she was 8 when our parents' car skidded off an icy road one February night in Massachusetts. The police officer who came to our door looked so uncomfortable delivering the news that would shatter our childhood. Our grandmother Margaret took us in, a tough but loving woman who lived in a modest, 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Boston. The space was tight, but her heart was big enough to hold our grief. From the beginning, Natalie and I were different. I was the studious, responsible one who understood early that life wasn't going to hand us anything. Natalie was sociable and charming, the type who could walk into a room and make friends instantly. Grandma Margaret worked as a school cafeteria manager, which kept food on our table but didn't leave much for extras. I started mowing lawns at 13 and stocking grocery shelves at 16, determined that our circumstances wouldn't define our futures. Winter mornings were especially tough. I remember waking up before dawn to shovel our elderly neighbors' driveways for extra cash, my fingers numb despite 2 pairs of gloves. Natalie would still be sleeping when I left, but I'd make sure her lunch was packed and her favorite sweater was laid out before I headed to school. Grandma Margaret noticed these small gestures and once told me, "You've got an old soul, Owen. Just don't forget you're still growing too." When Natalie hit high school, I was already working my way through community college, taking night classes while working days at a local tech firm. I'd always had a knack for computers, and coding became my escape. The logical patterns of programming made sense when little else did. While other guys my age were partying or playing video games, I was debugging code and learning new languages, driven by a vision of financial security that seemed perpetually out of reach. By the time Natalie was considering colleges, I had transferred to a 4-year university and was stretching every dollar to cover my education. Then Natalie got accepted to Briarcliff University with a partial scholarship, a private school with prestige and connections that could open doors for her. I still remember her jumping up and down in our small living room, Grandma Margaret wiping away tears of pride. "You did it, baby girl," she kept saying, while I calculated tuition costs in my head. 3 months into her first semester, her scholarship fell through due to budget cuts. She called me crying, terrified she'd have to leave. The fear in her voice transported me back to the night our parents died. That same helplessness, that same pleading tone. Without hesitation, I picked up more hours, took out an additional loan, and sent her what she needed. It meant putting my own master's degree on hold and living in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates. But seeing her thrive made it worthwhile, or so I thought at the time. My roommates couldn't understand why I worked so much. "Dude, you're missing the best years of your life," Marcus would say, trying to drag me to campus parties. He didn't know about the nights I'd stay up calculating how to stretch my paycheck between Natalie's textbooks and my own rent. Only much later did Marcus admit he'd admired my determination, even while worrying about me burning out. As Natalie progressed through college, I noticed subtle changes. Her calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, she spoke about new friends with summer homes and European vacations. Her voice took on a different cadence, a slightly affected tone I didn't recognize. She stopped bringing roommates home during breaks, making excuses about study groups or internship opportunities. When Grandma Margaret asked why Natalie barely visited anymore, I made excuses for her, not wanting our grandmother to feel the sting of rejection I was beginning to recognize. The Christmas before Grandma Margaret passed away was particularly telling. Natalie arrived 3 hours late for our traditional family dinner, spent most of the evening texting, and left early for a friend's party in a more affluent neighborhood. I watched our grandmother's shoulders slump slightly as the door closed, though she quickly masked her hurt with a smile. "She's finding her way," Grandma said, squeezing my hand. Some people need to wander before they remember where home is. Meanwhile, I was building my career in software development. By 30, I had secured a position at Horizon Technologies, one of Boston's fastest-growing startups. My financial situation improved, but my personal life suffered. My girlfriend Jessica ended our 2-year relationship, frustrated by my constant availability for Natalie's emergencies, while our own plans took a back seat. "You can't save someone who's embarrassed by the person saving them," she said during our final argument. The truth hurt, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Jessica wasn't wrong. Twice, I'd canceled weekend trips with her to help Natalie move apartments. Once, I left Jessica's birthday dinner when Natalie called with a financial emergency that turned out to be concert tickets she wanted to buy for herself and some friends. Jessica saw the pattern long before I did, and her parting words stayed with me. "I hope someday you find someone who puts you first, the way you put everyone else first." My friend circle had narrowed to a few loyal people who understood my history. Marcus, my college roommate who now taught high school science. Diane, a lawyer I met through work. And Trevor, who managed restaurants and bars across the city. They saw the imbalance in my relationship with Natalie, but respected my choices even when they disagreed. Diane was the most outspoken, using her legal precision to highlight problematic patterns. "If this were any other relationship, you'd call it exploitative," she pointed out one evening over drinks. I dismissed her concerns, though they echoed in my mind during sleepless nights. When Natalie graduated, I was there in the audience, prouder than anyone. She had a marketing degree and quickly landed a job at a prestigious firm in Boston. I helped her with the security deposit on her first apartment, expecting our relationship might equalize now that she was established. Instead, the distance grew. She moved to a trendy neighborhood and rarely invited me to her gatherings. When I did attend, I felt like an awkward outsider among her polished friends. One particularly painful incident occurred at a housewarming party she threw. I arrived with a carefully chosen houseplant and homemade bread, Grandma Margaret's recipe. Natalie greeted me with a quick hug before disappearing into the crowd. Later, I overheard her explaining my presence to a friend. "That's just my brother. He's kind of a tech geek, not really into the whole social scene." The dismissal stung, but I swallowed my hurt and stayed another hour before quietly leaving. The plant I brought sat untouched near the door, still in its wrapping. Then came my promotion to lead developer at Horizon. Finally, at 33, I had the financial stability I'd worked so hard for. I put a down payment on a modest condo and started thinking about my future. Maybe Jessica had been right. Maybe it was time to prioritize my own life. That's when Natalie met Bradley Winchester. Bradley Winchester came from the kind of New England family that had buildings named after them at prestigious universities. Tall, confident, with the easy charm of someone who's never worried about money, he worked in finance and had a summer home in the Hamptons. Natalie met him at a charity gala she attended for work, and their relationship moved quickly. 6 months later, she called to tell me they were engaged, her voice breathless with excitement. "Owen, you have to meet his family," she gushed. "They're amazing. His dad plays golf with the governor." During those first weeks of her engagement, Natalie called more frequently than she had in years, though our conversations centered exclusively around Bradley, his family connections, and the wedding plans rapidly taking shape. She sent me photos of engagement rings that cost more than my annual salary, of Bradley's family estate, of the country club where they played tennis on weekends. Each image seemed designed to highlight the gulf between her new life and our shared past. The introduction dinner was set at Winchester Manor, the family's colonial estate in Connecticut. I took a day off work and spent an hour choosing the right outfit, nothing too casual, but nothing that looked like I was trying too hard either. I drove my Toyota Camry through wrought iron gates and parked between a Jaguar and a Mercedes, already feeling out of place. Bradley greeted me warmly enough, but his parents Eleanor and Richard Winchester assessed me with subtle scrutiny that people of their class have perfected. "So you're in computers?" Richard asked over appetizers, making it sound like a slightly suspicious occupation. "Software development," I corrected. "I lead a team at Horizon Technologies." Startup?" he replied, exchanging glances with Eleanor. Risky business. The dining room featured original oil paintings and silverware that looked like museum pieces. A uniformed staff served each course with choreographed precision, while I struggled to remember which fork to use. Bradley's younger sister, Rachel, seemed to notice my discomfort and quietly indicated the correct utensil when the salad arrived. Her small kindness stood out amid the underlying tension of the evening. Throughout dinner, the conversation turned repeatedly to family history, prep schools, and vacation homes, none of which Natalie and I had. Natalie spoke of our late parents vaguely, mentioning our father's business interests rather than his actual job as a high school math teacher. She never mentioned Grandma Margaret or our modest upbringing. When Eleanor asked about our childhood home, Natalie described a neighborhood we'd only driven through. "And did you attend boarding school as well, Owen?" Eleanor inquired, sipping her wine. Before I could answer truthfully, Natalie jumped in. "Owen was more focused on academics than the whole boarding school experience," she said smoothly. "He was always the serious one." I caught Rachel's eye across the table, and something in her expression told me she saw through these fabrications. Later, as I was preparing to leave, she approached me in the hallway. "Families can be exhausting, can't they?" she said with a wry smile. "Even the ones we're born into." The wedding planning began almost immediately, with the Winchesters taking charge. The venue was Hawthorne Hall, one of New England's most exclusive wedding destinations, a restored 19th-century mansion with formal gardens and a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests. Natalie texted me about florists flying in from Holland and a dress designer coming from Paris. When we met for coffee a few weeks later, she seemed distant, checking her phone constantly. "The caterer alone is going to be $40,000, she mentioned casually. "Bradley's parents are covering most of it, but we need to contribute too." "How much are you thinking?" I asked. "Well, I was hoping you could help with a small portion," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe 5,000? It was a significant amount, but I had been saving, and this was my only sister's wedding. "I can do that as my gift to you both," I agreed. Her expression brightened momentarily. "You're the best, Owen. This means so much to me." There was a time when her gratitude would have been enough. Now, I felt a nagging doubt, wondering if I was being valued or just utilized. Little did I know this small portion would grow. A week later, she called about the band she absolutely had to have. Could I add another 3,000? Then it was specialized lighting, custom invitations, welcome baskets for out-of-town guests. Each request came with the assurance it would be the last one. I began to feel like an ATM rather than a brother. One Tuesday evening, I met Natalie and Bradley at Hawthorne Hall for a venue walkthrough. The estate was undeniably beautiful, with manicured lawns stretching toward distant woods and interior spaces that breathed old-world luxury. As we toured the reception area, I suggested a table arrangement that might create a better flow for guests. The wedding planner, Veronica, a sleek woman with a permanent expression of mild disapproval, dismissed my idea immediately. "We typically find that brothers aren't particularly interested in these details," she said with a thin smile when I asked about the seating arrangement. Bradley nodded in agreement. "Best to leave it to the professionals, man." I noticed Natalie didn't defend me or acknowledge my suggestion. Instead, she changed the subject to the champagne selection, deferring completely to Veronica's expertise. As the walkthrough continued, I felt increasingly invisible, my role apparently reduced to checkbook and occasional prop. I was gradually being excluded from decisions. Natalie had originally asked me to give a toast at the reception, but then informed me that Bradley's best friend would handle all speeches. My role in the ceremony was reduced to participating groomsman, rather than giving her away as we discussed after our grandmother passed away 2 years prior. "It just makes more sense this way," she explained when I questioned the change. "Bradley's uncle is a retired judge, and it will look better in the photos if he walks me down the aisle." Look better. Those words revealed priorities I hadn't fully grasped until then. This wedding wasn't about celebrating a union or honoring relationships. It was about creating an impression, maintaining an illusion of old money and established connections that Natalie craved and I apparently threatened. Our scheduled brother-sister planning dinners were repeatedly canceled. "Sorry, Bradley's parents want to discuss the honeymoon plans," or The wedding planner needed an emergency meeting. Each time, I swallowed my disappointment and told myself it was her big day, not mine. As the wedding date approached, Natalie's transformation seemed complete. Her Boston accent had disappeared, replaced by the neutral tones of old money. She used phrases I'd never heard from her before, summer as a verb, frightfully as an intensifier. She referenced childhood sailing lessons we'd never had, and ski trips we'd never taken. I barely recognized the sister I'd helped raise. Then came the rehearsal dinner incident. I wasn't initially included on the invitation list, an oversight that was corrected only after I mentioned it to Natalie. When I arrived at the upscale Boston restaurant, I found myself seated at the far table with Bradley's distant cousins, while Natalie sat with his immediate family and closest friends. The seating arrangement felt deliberate, a physical manifestation of my relegation to the periphery of her life. Throughout the dinner, I made polite conversation with strangers who clearly wondered who I was and why I was there. One elderly aunt asked if I was from the bride's side, as if this were a regular wedding rather than my sister's. Midway through the evening, I went to the bar for a drink and overheard Natalie's voice from the adjacent private dining area where she was speaking with Bradley's mother. "No, I totally understand the seating chart concerns," Natalie was saying. "Honestly, I hardly consider Owen family anymore. We've just grown so far apart. He's stuck in the past." The words hit like a physical blow. I quietly returned to my table, made polite conversation with strangers for another hour, and left early, claiming a work emergency. That night, I lay awake wondering if the sister I'd sacrificed so much for had disappeared completely. As I drove home, memories flooded back Natalie at 10, crying over a math problem until I sat up with her past midnight to help her understand. At 16, calling me from a party where kids were drinking, asking me to pick her up, no questions asked. At 20, panicking over a failed midterm and needing emergency tutoring. Each crisis I'd responded to, each need I'd met, now seemed like stepping stones that led to my own irrelevance once she'd found a more advantageous connection. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, I received a text from Rachel Winchester. "You deserved better last night. Just wanted you to know not everyone thinks like they do." The unexpected support from a virtual stranger made the rejection from my own sister all the more stark. 3 days before the wedding, I was working late at the office, finalizing a project so I could take time off for the ceremony. My phone buzzed with a notification I initially ignored, assuming it was another text from the groomsmen's group chat about tuxedo fittings. When I finally checked during a coffee break, my stomach dropped. It was an alert from my credit card company. "Your card ending in 4,832 has been charged $28,000 by Winchester Weddings, LLC." I stared at the screen, certain it was a mistake. The amount represented nearly all my savings money I'd been setting aside for years, working overtime, taking on freelance projects, skipping vacations. My hand shook slightly as I called the credit card company, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. I immediately called my bank, certain there had been a mistake. The customer service representative confirmed the charge was legitimate. The card information had been entered manually along with my billing address and security code. "Would you like to report this as fraudulent?" she asked. I hesitated, a knot forming in my throat. "Let me make a call first." My hands shook as I calculated the impact. $28,000 would completely drain the savings I'd set aside for my condo down payment money I'd worked years to accumulate. I called Natalie repeatedly, but she didn't answer. Finally, I texted, "Need to speak with you urgently about a large charge on my card. Please call me." 20 minutes later, she replied, "At bachelorette dinner. Can't talk now." I couldn't wait. I drove across town to the restaurant where I knew they were celebrating an exclusive rooftop venue with a spectacular view of the Boston skyline. The maitre d' initially tried to block my access, but reluctantly pointed me to a private room when I explained it was a family emergency. Through the glass doors, I could see Natalie surrounded by friends, champagne flowing freely, everyone laughing and taking selfies. Her eyes widened with annoyance when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, pulling me into the hallway. Her designer dress probably cost more than my monthly rent, and the diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she gestured in frustration. Did you charge $28,000 to my credit card? I asked, still hoping for a reasonable explanation. A mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but deliberate betrayal. Her expression shifted from surprise to something harder. The venue needed final payment today. Bradley's parents already covered most of it. And you used my card without asking? Natalie, that's literally all my savings. I was going to buy a condo next month. She rolled her eyes. Don't be so dramatic. You can postpone your little condo purchase. This is my wedding. Do you know how embarrassing it would be to tell Bradley's family I couldn't cover the venue? I stared at her, struggling to recognize my sister in this stranger's face. The girl who once cried when she accidentally broke my science fair project, who made homemade birthday cards because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. Where had she gone? You need to reverse the charge. Now. My voice was quiet but firm. That's when her expression changed to something I'll never forget, a smirk of entitlement and dismissal that made my blood run cold. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and in them I saw not just indifference to my situation, but actual contempt. You loser who doesn't even have a family, it's the least you can do, she said, voice dripping with contempt. I mean, what else are you saving for? You don't have a wife, kids, not even a girlfriend. All you have is work and that pathetic apartment. Meanwhile, I'm building a real life with a real family. Each word landed like a physical blow. The sister I'd protected, supported, and loved had just thrown my deepest insecurities back at me as weapons. My lack of close relationships, partially a result of prioritizing her needs for so many years, was now being used to justify theft. Before I could respond, Bradley appeared, sliding his arm around Natalie's waist. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his watch expensive, his presence radiating the confidence of someone who's never had to worry about making ends meet. Everything okay here? He asked, glancing at me with thinly veiled annoyance. Natalie leaned into him. Owen's just being difficult about helping with the wedding costs. You know how he gets. Bradley's expression hardened. Look, man, we've bent over backwards to include you in this wedding despite your situation. The least you could do is help your sister have the day she deserves without making a scene. They exchanged a look then, a shared glance of contempt that made me realize this wasn't just Natalie. They had discussed me, labeled me, dismissed me together. In that moment, 20+ years of love and sacrifice seemed to evaporate. I felt an odd calm descend. The hurt was there, massive and raw, but beneath it was something unexpected relief, as if a fog had lifted, showing me clearly what I'd refused to see for years. The weight of responsibility I'd carried since our parents' death, the constant need to protect Natalie at my own expense. Perhaps it was time to put it down. Then you'll love what happens next, I said quietly. Natalie's smirk faltered. What does that mean? It means I finally see things clearly, I replied, turning to leave. Owen, she called after me. Don't you dare ruin this for me. I walked out without looking back, their confused voices fading behind me. In my car, I sat motionless for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my phone and began making calls. The first was to my credit card company, requesting an investigation into unauthorized use. The second was to Marcus. I need help, I said simply, and without question he responded, I'll be at your place in 30 minutes. As I drove through Boston's nighttime streets, a strange sense of liberation began to mingle with the pain. For the first time in decades, I was choosing myself. Whatever came next would be on my terms, not dictated by guilt or obligation. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I drove home in a daze, the conversation replaying in my mind. The apartment I'd once seen as temporary suddenly felt like a sanctuary. I made tea Grandma Margaret's remedy for life's troubles and began sorting through my thoughts. Outside my window, Boston's skyline twinkled with countless lights, each representing lives and stories I knew nothing about. How many other people were sitting alone tonight, processing betrayal from those they loved most? The thought was oddly comforting. This pain wasn't unique to me, which meant others had survived it. In my home office, I opened the filing cabinet where I kept important documents. Inside was a folder labeled Natalie. I spread its contents across my desk: copies of tuition payments, apartment security deposits, loan documents with my signature, birthday checks, emergency fund transfers. On a yellow legal pad, I began calculating year by year what I'd contributed to my sister's life. The total surprised even me. Just over $3,000 over 12 years, not including countless smaller expenses and gifts. There were other records, too. Emails where Natalie had promised to pay back emergency loans, text messages expressing gratitude that now seemed hollow, birthday cards with heartfelt messages that contradicted her recent cruelty. I was creating not just a financial record, but an emotional one, documenting the slow transformation of our relationship. Next to financial documents were photographs. Natalie and me building a snowman after our parents' funeral. Her high school graduation, her arm thrown around my neck. The two of us with Grandma Margaret on her 80th birthday. The images blurred as my eyes welled up. What had happened to that girl? When had she become someone who could look at me with such contempt? The buzzer rang, announcing Marcus's arrival. He took one look at my face and wordlessly pulled me into a hug. We'd been through a lot together: his divorce, my grandmother's death, and words weren't always necessary. When he released me, he simply asked, "What do you need?" Around midnight, I texted my 3 closest friends: "Emergency meeting. My place. Tomorrow 7 a.m. Bring coffee." Then I took a sleeping pill and fell into dreamless sleep. They arrived punctually, concern evident on their faces. Marcus brought bagels, Diane carried a cardboard tray of coffees, and Trevor arrived with a worried expression and a bottle of whiskey for later. I explained the situation, showing them the credit card notification and recounting Natalie's words. "She called you a loser without a family?" Marcus echoed, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" Diane paced the room, her legal mind already at work. "This is textbook unauthorized use of a payment card," she said. "Intent to defraud is clear from the context. You could press charges if you wanted to." "I don't want to see my sister arrested," I replied. I'm not even sure what I want." "Justice," Trevor suggested. "Accountability. Recognition of what you've done for her." "That's not just cruel," Diane said, her lawyer's mind already working. "It's potentially illegal. Using your credit card without permission is fraud, regardless of your relationship." Trevor paced my living room. "I know the manager at Hawthorne Hall. Want me to call him?" "Not yet," I said. "I need to think this through carefully." For the next hour, we dissected the situation from every angle. Marcus argued for complete severance. "She's toxic, man. Cut her loose." Diane approached it legally. "Document everything. Protect yourself financially, then decide about the relationship." Trevor, always the mediator, sought middle ground. Make her face consequences without burning bridges permanently. Over the next hour, a 3-part plan emerged. First, the financial aspect. Diane helped me call the credit card company to dispute the charge as unauthorized. They agreed to investigate, but the process would take several days past the wedding date. "The key is that you're not lying or exaggerating," Diane emphasized. "You didn't authorize this charge, period. That's all the credit card company needs to know." Second, the logistical angle. Trevor discreetly contacted his colleague at Hawthorne Hall, confirming that final payment was indeed due and that the venue required 48 hours notice for any payment changes. He also learned that without payment confirmation, they would not proceed with event setup. "David Hawthorne is a straight shooter," Trevor explained. "If the payment doesn't clear, he won't make exceptions, not even for the Winchesters." Third, and most difficult, the emotional decision. How would I handle my relationship with Natalie going forward? We debated various approaches, from complete severance to conditional reconciliation. "She needs to understand consequences," Marcus said. "You've been her safety net so long she thinks it's her right." "But she's still your sister," Diane countered. "Family is complicated." I showed them the folder of financial records and photographs. "This isn't just about money," I explained. "It's about years of sacrificing my own needs, only to be treated like I'm worthless once I'm no longer useful." Trevor examined one of the photos Natalie and me at a Red Sox game years ago, both smiling broadly. "You need to decide what you want the future to look like," he said. "Not just how to handle the wedding crisis, but what kind of relationship, if any, you want going forward." By noon, our strategy was set. I would allow the chargeback process to proceed. I would not contact Natalie or Bradley, but would be prepared for their inevitable outreach when the venue payment issue arose. I would set clear terms for any financial assistance I might provide. And most importantly, I would require accountability, a genuine acknowledgement of both the unauthorized charge and the years of support I'd provided. My friends left, extracting promises that I would call if I needed anything. For the remainder of the day, I prepared myself mentally. I requested a personal day from work for Friday, the day before the wedding. I disabled social media notifications and set my phone to accept calls only from my approved contacts list. I even wrote out what I might say when confronted, knowing that in emotional moments, clarity often abandons us. That evening, I sent Natalie one text. "We need to discuss what happened and find a resolution. I'm available when you're ready to talk." It went unanswered. As I went to bed that night, I felt something unexpected, not vindictiveness or anger, but a strange sense of standing at a threshold. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first. The burden I hadn't even recognized I was carrying seemed lighter already. Around 3 in the morning, I woke suddenly, heart pounding. I'd been dreaming about our parents, not about their death, but about a summer picnic when we were kids. In the dream, my father was watching Natalie and me play, and he turned to my mother and said, "They'll always have each other." The memory, if it even was a memory, and not just a creation of my subconscious, brought fresh pain. Had I failed my parents' expectations, or had I fulfilled them too well, to my own detriment? I got up and went to the window, looking out at the quiet city. Somewhere out there, Natalie was sleeping, perhaps worried about her wedding, perhaps not giving me a second thought. The distance between us had never felt greater, and yet I felt a strange new clarity about my path forward. Friday morning dawned clear and mild, perfect wedding weather. I woke early, made coffee, and prepared for what would come. My phone remained silent until precisely 8:15, when it lit up with Natalie's name. I let it go to voicemail. The message was terse. "Call me back immediately." By 9, my phone was vibrating constantly. Natalie had called 7 times. Bradley twice. Even Veronica, the wedding planner, tried reaching me. I silenced the device and went for a long run through the Boston Commons, focusing on my breathing rather than the situation unfolding across town. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn. Joggers nodded as they passed, tourists consulted maps, children chased squirrels across open spaces, normal life continuing all around me while my personal world shifted on its axis. There was comfort in this ordinariness, a reminder that whatever happened with Natalie, the sun would still rise tomorrow. When I returned home and checked my messages, the tone had evolved dramatically. Natalie's first voicemail was angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing? The venue says our payment didn't go through." The third was threatening. "If you ruin my wedding, I swear I'll never speak to you again." By the 6th, she was crying, "Please, Owen, I don't understand why you're doing this. Please call me back." Bradley's messages were predictably different cold fury in the first. "You better fix this immediately, or you'll regret it." And thinly veiled threats in the second. "My father has connections you can't imagine. Don't test us." I made myself breakfast, trying to maintain normal routines while considering my responses. This wasn't about punishing Natalie, I reminded myself. It was about establishing that actions have consequences, even between siblings, especially between siblings. Text messages flooded in from numbers I didn't recognize. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, even Bradley's parents, all attempting to reach me on Natalie's behalf. Through Trevor's updates from his venue contact, I learned that Hawthorne Hall was refusing to begin setup without payment confirmation. The florists were waiting with thousands of dollars of arrangements. The caterers needed direction. "David says it's complete chaos over there," Trevor texted. Bradley's father is threatening to sue the venue for breach of contract, but David's standing firm, no payment, no wedding. I felt a twinge of sympathy for the venue staff caught in this situation. They weren't responsible for Natalie's actions or my response. I made a mental note to commend David's professionalism when this was all over. Around noon, my intercom buzzed. 2 of Natalie's bridesmaids were downstairs, demanding to speak with me. I recognized their names from the wedding program, Madison and Amber, college friends who had never bothered to get to know me despite years of opportunity. "Owen, this is childish," one called through the intercom. "Just come down and talk to us." I declined through the intercom, suggesting they focus on supporting the bride rather than tracking me down. "Tell Natalie I'll meet her at Hawthorne Hall at 5:30, I added before disconnecting. I spent the afternoon preparing for the confrontation, rehearsing what I wanted to say and anticipating various scenarios. This wasn't about winning or punishing, it was about establishing truth and boundaries. I showered, shaved carefully, and chose a suit that conveyed respect for the occasion without being the formal wedding attire I'd been assigned. As the afternoon progressed, I received an unexpected text from an unknown number. "This is Rachel Winchester, Bradley's sister. Can we talk? I'm not here to attack you." Curious, I agreed to a phone call. Rachel's voice was nothing like her brother's warm, with a subtle humor underlying her words. "I want you to know I think you're right to stand your ground," she said without preamble. "They've been awful to you." "You're taking my side against your brother?" I asked, surprised. "I love my brother, but I don't always like him," she replied. "And I've watched how they've treated you these past months. It's not right." She proceeded to give me updates on the unfolding situation. Natalie was having a complete meltdown at the bridal suite. Bradley was furious, pacing and making threatening calls. His parents were mortified by the public embarrassment. The wedding planner was attempting damage control with increasingly desperate measures. "They're trying to get Bradley's parents to cover the venue payment," Rachel reported, "but they're refusing on principle now. They're saying if Natalie would do this to her own brother, what might she do to them in the future?" She described the scene at the hotel where the wedding party was preparing. Natalie alternating between rage and despair, bridesmaids making frantic calls to every bank and loan service they could think of, Bradley arguing with his father in increasingly heated terms. "My mother's worried about what her friends will say," Rachel added with a note of disgust. 200 guests, many arriving from out of town, and all she cares about is how this looks to her social circle. Our conversation lasted nearly an hour. Rachel, it turned out, had always felt like an outsider in her status-conscious family. She had chosen to become a public defender rather than join the family investment firm, creating her own rift with her parents. In her, I found an unexpected ally, someone who understood family complexity from the inside. "What are you planning to do?" she asked finally. "I'm going to let them sweat a bit longer," I admitted. "Then I'll appear at the venue with terms." "Good," she said simply. "Sometimes people need to face consequences to see clearly." After our call, I sat quietly for a while, reflecting on how strange it was to find understanding from someone I barely knew while being treated as an enemy by my own sister. Family, I was learning, wasn't just about blood. It was about recognition, respect, and reciprocity. As evening approached, Trevor called with news. The venue had given a final deadline of 6 p.m. for payment resolution, or they would begin calling guests to inform them of cancellation. The ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow at 4 p.m. The clock was ticking. "David's getting pressure from every direction," Trevor reported. Bradley's father tried to suggest they proceed with the wedding and resolve the payment after, but David refused. He said they've been burned too many times by similar promises. At 5:30, I showered, dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks, and got into my car. The folder of financial records went into my briefcase, along with printed copies of the credit card statement showing the unauthorized charge. It was time to face my sister. As I drove, I reminded myself to stay calm regardless of what happened. Emotions would be running high, but clarity and dignity would serve me better than anger or resentment. Whatever happened next would shape our relationship for years to come if there was to be a relationship at all. Hawthorne Hall was even more impressive in the golden evening light, a historic mansion with manicured grounds and a renowned ballroom. Cars were parked outside the wedding party, presumably having an emergency meeting. I recognized Natalie's red Audi and Bradley's sleek BMW among them. The building's stone facade glowed warmly in the setting sun, belying the tension within its walls. Iron lanterns flanked the entrance, already lit despite the early hour. In different circumstances, it would indeed have been a magical setting for a wedding. I parked and walked calmly to the entrance, where a harried-looking venue manager was speaking with Veronica, the wedding planner. They both turned as I approached, recognition dawning on their faces. "You must be Owen," the manager said. "I'm David Hawthorne. We've been trying to reach you all day," Veronica added accusingly, her professional composure cracking slightly. "I'm aware," I replied. "I understand there's a payment situation that needs resolution." David Hawthorne was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with a straightforward manner that contrasted with Veronica's affected sophistication. He nodded briskly. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private." David led us to a private office where, moments later, Natalie burst through the door, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her hair, partially styled for tomorrow's wedding, was coming loose, and her eyes were red and swollen. Behind her came Bradley, his face flushed with anger, followed by his parents and several members of the wedding party. "How could you do this to me?" Natalie shouted, her voice breaking. "My wedding is tomorrow." I remained seated, maintaining the calm I'd practiced. "I didn't do anything, Natalie. I simply reported an unauthorized charge on my credit card." "Unauthorized," she sputtered. "You're my brother. You're supposed to support me." "Support doesn't mean allowing theft," I replied evenly. Bradley stepped forward, looming over me. His perfectly tailored shirt was wrinkled, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. "Listen, you little—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence," I interrupted. "Not if you want a resolution." Eleanor Winchester placed a restraining hand on her son's arm, her socialite composure barely masking her anger. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she moved, a subtle reminder of the wealth and status that had drawn my sister into this circle. "Perhaps we should discuss this civilly," she said with forced calm. "Excellent suggestion," I agreed, standing up. "David, is there somewhere more private we could speak? Just family." The venue manager showed us to a conference room with walnut paneling and oil paintings of pastoral scenes. Natalie, Bradley, his parents, and I sat around a gleaming table. Rachel slipped in quietly, giving me an imperceptible nod of encouragement. She took a seat slightly apart from her family, her presence a silent statement. "Let me be clear about what happened," I began. 3 days ago, $28,000 was charged to my credit card without my knowledge or consent for this wedding venue. When I confronted Natalie about it, she called me, and I quote, "a loser who doesn't even have a family," and said this theft was the least I could do. Natalie opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. "I have the text messages and credit card statements right here," I said, placing my phone on the table. "Before anyone speaks, I want to add context." I produced the folder I'd brought, spreading out documents chronologically. The paper trail of my support for Natalie over the years created a physical timeline across the polished table check copies, wire transfer confirmations, loan documents, all meticulously organized. These are records of financial support I've provided to Natalie over the past 12 years. College tuition when her scholarship fell through. First, apartment security deposit, emergency loans, in total, over $53,000, not including countless smaller expenses. Bradley's parents exchanged glances. Richard Winchester examined some of the documents, his expression shifting subtly. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, the comfortable narrative about his future daughter-in-law beginning to unravel. "I put myself through college, working multiple jobs," I continued. "I postponed my own advanced degree to help Natalie complete hers. I lived with roommates until my 30s so she could have the opportunities she wanted, and I did it gladly because she's my sister, and I love her." My voice remained steady, but I felt the emotion rising in my throat. When our parents died, I promised I would always be there for her. I've kept that promise, even when it meant sacrificing my own plans. But yesterday, I realized our relationship has become one-sided. I realized I've been enabling behavior that isn't healthy for either of us. Natalie was crying silently now, her shoulders shaking with each breath. Bradley looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact. Richard Winchester continued examining the documents, while Eleanor stared at Natalie with an expression I couldn't quite read. "So here are my terms," I said. "I will provide $5,000 toward the venue cost the original amount I offered as a wedding gift. I will do this on 2 conditions. First, Natalie and Bradley must acknowledge, here and now, that taking my card information and making that charge was wrong. Second, I want a genuine apology not for this incident alone, but for the pattern of taking me for granted while simultaneously pushing me aside." The room fell silent. I could hear the faint sound of catering staff moving around outside, unaware of the drama unfolding behind closed doors. A clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the moments of this standoff. Eleanor Winchester was the first to speak, her voice carrying the precision of someone accustomed to managing difficult social situations. "Richard and I had no idea about any of this," she said, looking at Natalie with new eyes. "We were led to believe your relationship was distant because of other factors." "What other factors?" I asked. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "Natalie mentioned you had some personal struggles, that you had difficulty maintaining relationships and were somewhat clingy with her." The revelation stung, but didn't surprise me entirely. It made sense that Natalie would need to explain my absence from her narrative somehow. I laughed without humor. "The only struggle I've had is balancing my own life with being her constant safety net." Bradley finally spoke, his voice subdued. "I didn't know about the financial support. Natalie said you two just weren't close." All eyes turned to my sister, who sat with her head down, tears falling onto the polished table. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling, and in its place, I could see glimpses of the girl I'd grown up with, vulnerable, uncertain, human. "Owen," she finally whispered, "I don't know what to say." "The truth would be a good start," I suggested gently. She looked up, her face crumpling. "I was ashamed of where we came from, of Grandma's house, of how hard everything was for us. When I met Bradley and his family, I wanted to be someone else, someone with a background like theirs." Her voice broke. "I convinced myself you were holding me back by reminding me of the past. But the truth is, I wouldn't have any of this without you." The words I'd wanted to hear felt hollow now that they were finally spoken. Not because I didn't believe her sincerity in this moment, but because I understood the gap between crisis-induced remorse and genuine change. The apology that followed was painful but genuine. Natalie acknowledged everything: the years of support, the gradual distancing, the cruel words at the restaurant. Bradley, too, apologized for his role and the assumptions he'd made. "I never meant to steal from you," Natalie said, wiping her eyes. "I just panicked when the venue needed payment, and I knew Bradley's parents wouldn't cover it all. I thought I'd figure something out before you noticed, maybe get an advance on my bonus. It was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Richard Winchester, apparently moved by what he'd heard, cleared his throat. "We will cover the venue payment," he announced. "It seems only fair, given the circumstances." I shook my head. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. I will contribute the $5,000 I promised. Natalie and Bradley can figure out the rest together, as a couple should." I looked directly at my sister. Real relationships are built on honesty and mutual support, not on one person constantly rescuing the other. The tension in the room gradually eased. Rachel caught my eye across the table and gave a slight smile of approval. Whatever happened with Natalie, I felt I'd gained a friend in her future sister-in-law, someone who valued authenticity over appearances. In the end, a compromise was reached. I provided my original promised gift. Bradley's parents covered a portion, and Bradley himself arranged a last-minute transfer for the remainder. The venue payment was settled just before the deadline, and David Hawthorne confirmed the wedding would proceed as planned. "We'll need to condense the setup timeline," he told Veronica, who was furiously making notes. "But we can make it work." As we prepared to leave, Rachel approached me. "That was impressive," she said quietly. "Will you still attend tomorrow?" I hesitated, genuinely uncertain. Part of me wanted to skip the whole event, to avoid the awkwardness and potential tension. Another part recognized that my absence would create yet another narrative, one where I was the villain who almost ruined the wedding, then disappeared. "She's still my sister," I finally replied. Rachel nodded. "Good man." Then, with a wry smile, she added, "Though if you're looking to escape the reception early, I know a great bar nearby." The wedding the next day was beautiful, but subdued. I attended as planned, stood where I was asked to stand, and gave a brief, heartfelt toast that spoke of resilience and growth without alluding to recent events. Guests who knew nothing of the previous day's drama commented on what a lovely ceremony it was, how happy the couple looked, how perfect the weather had turned out to be. I watched Natalie move through her reception, radiant in her designer gown, accepting congratulations and posing for photographs. Occasionally our eyes would meet across the room, and something unspoken would pass between us. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or caution, or the first tentative steps toward a new understanding. Before leaving for her honeymoon, Natalie found a moment to speak with me privately. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry. Can we talk when I get back?" I assured her we would. As I drove home that night, I felt neither triumph nor regret, just the quiet certainty that something important had shifted, not just for Natalie but for me as well. The weeks following the wedding passed quietly. Natalie sent a postcard from their honeymoon in Bali with a simple message, "Thinking of you. We need to talk when I'm back." I sent a brief but warm reply, giving her space while making it clear I was open to reconciliation. During this time, I refocused on my own life. I resumed my condo search, finding a perfect 2-bedroom, overlooking the Charles River. The morning I signed the mortgage papers, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This milestone was delayed, but not denied, a testament to my resilience and determination. At work, I threw myself into a challenging new project, developing security algorithms for financial transactions. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the technical challenges provided a welcome distraction from personal complexities. My team's innovative approach caught the attention of our CEO, leading to additional funding and recognition within the industry. Most evenings, I spent time with my small circle of friends who had supported me through the crisis, or explored hobbies I'd long neglected: photography, hiking the trails around Boston, even taking cooking classes at a local culinary school. Gradually, I reconnected with parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my caretaker role. Marcus joined me for weekend hikes, our conversations ranging from technology to philosophy to his recent dating adventures. Diane helped me navigate the legal aspects of my condo purchase, refusing payment and insisting it was just friends helping friends. Trevor introduced me to a network of restaurant owners and chefs, expanding my social circle beyond the tech industry for the first time in years. Rachel Winchester and I kept in touch, initially comparing notes about the wedding aftermath, then discovering shared interests in classic films and obscure bookstores. Unlike most of Bradley's family, she made no attempt to maintain appearances or gloss over uncomfortable truths. Her directness was refreshing, and our friendship developed naturally despite the complicated family connections. One evening, over coffee at a small cafe in Cambridge, Rachel mentioned her colleague Elise. "She's brilliant, works too hard, and has absolutely no patience for pretension," Rachel said with a grin. "You two would either hate each other immediately or get along famously." The introduction proved fortunate. Elise, a dedicated public defender with a sharp mind and surprising sense of humor, approached life with a straightforwardness I found appealing. Our first date coffee that stretched into dinner felt effortless in a way relationships rarely had for me before. "You're different than Rachel described," Elise mentioned over dessert. "How so?" I asked. "She said you were the most emotionally intelligent tech guy she'd ever met," Elise replied with a smile. "But she didn't mention you were also funny." As Elise and I began spending more time together, I found myself opening up about my history with Natalie, in ways I never had with previous partners. Elise's work with troubled families gave her unique insight into complex family dynamics, and her perspective helped me contextualize my experiences without judgment. 3 months after the wedding, My phone lit up with Natalie's name. She wanted to meet at Millie's Diner, the place our grandmother used to take us for special occasions when we were kids. The choice of location wasn't lost on me. When I arrived, Natalie was already there, looking different, somehow less polished. More like the sister I remembered. Her designer handbag was absent, replaced by a worn leather satchel I'd given her years ago. She'd pulled her hair back simply, and her makeup was minimal, revealing the light freckles across her nose that she usually concealed. "Thanks for coming," she said as I slid into the booth. "Of course," I replied. "How are things?" She took a deep breath. "Different. Bradley and I have been in counseling. Things have been strained since the wedding. His parents are still pretty cold toward me." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's forced us to rely on each other rather than his family's approval. It's actually been good in some ways." She paused, fidgeting with her napkin. "I've been in individual therapy too." "That takes courage," I acknowledged. "My therapist asked me to make a timeline of our lives after Mom and Dad died," she continued. "When I laid it all out, everything you did, all the times you rescued me, I couldn't believe how blind I'd been." Her eyes welled up. "Owen, I don't even know how to apologize enough." "You don't need to keep apologizing," I said. "But I do need to know what changed. When did I become someone you could treat that way?" The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Natalie spoke of insecurities I'd never recognized, of feeling overshadowed by my responsibility and competence, of using Bradley's world as an escape from feelings of inadequacy. She admitted to deliberately downplaying my role in her life to fit into her new social circle, then gradually beginning to believe the narrative she'd created. "I convinced myself you were okay with it," she said, "that you didn't really need me the way I'd needed you. It was easier than acknowledging what I was throwing away." She described the mounting pressure as the wedding approached Bradley's parents' expectations, her desperate desire to belong in their world, the financial strain she'd hidden from everyone. "I started believing I deserved their lifestyle," she admitted, "that I'd earned it somehow, rather than just marrying into it. For my part, I admitted to enabling patterns that weren't healthy, to accepting less than I deserved from our relationship out of guilt and obligation. I acknowledged how my own identity had become wrapped up in being her protector and provider, making it difficult for me to establish boundaries. After Mom and Dad died, I think I confused being your brother with being your parent," I told her. "And that wasn't fair to either of us." The waitress brought us pineapple for me, cherry for Natalie, just as we'd ordered as kids, and for a moment, we were silent, the familiar tastes bringing back memories of simpler times. "Grandma would have been so disappointed in me," Natalie said finally, her voice small. "No," I disagreed. "She would have been sad about what happened, but never disappointed in who you are. She always said we were both works in progress." Rebuilding came in small steps. Sunday phone calls became a tradition again. We met monthly at Millie's Diner, sometimes with Bradley, sometimes just the two of us. I established boundaries, financial and emotional, that I'd never set before. Natalie respected them, seeming to find security rather than restriction in these new parameters. "It's like learning to be siblings as adults," she commented during one of our meetings. "We never really had a chance to figure that out before." My relationship with Elise deepened during this time. She met Natalie after 2 months of dating, an introduction I approached with some trepidation. To my relief, they connected over a shared interest in documentary films, and while they weren't instant friends, there was mutual respect that felt promising. After 6 months, Natalie and Bradley invited me, along with Elise, to dinner at their apartment. The evening was somewhat awkward, but genuine. Bradley, stripped of his family's immediate influence, revealed a dry sense of humor and a capacity for self-reflection I hadn't seen before. He'd recently declined a position at his father's firm to pursue a role at a smaller company that aligned better with his personal interests. "Turns out when you stop trying to please everyone else, you actually figure out what you want," he commented, exchanging a meaningful glance with Natalie. When Natalie walked me out afterward, she mentioned something our grandmother used to say. "Margaret always told us, the truth will cost you something, but a lie will cost you everything." I didn't understand that until now. As the 1-year anniversary of the wedding approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired and the profound lessons it had taught me. First, that self-respect isn't selfish, it's necessary. By allowing myself to be consistently devalued, I wasn't being noble. I was participating in a dynamic that ultimately hurt both Natalie and me. Setting boundaries wasn't about withholding love, but about creating a healthier framework for that love to exist within. Second, that even the closest family relationships need boundaries. Love without limits sounds romantic, but in reality, it often becomes enabling behavior that prevents growth on both sides. True support means helping others develop their own strength, not continuously carrying their burdens. Third, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. I could forgive Natalie without pretending the hurt never happened. Remembering protected me from repeating patterns, while forgiving freed me from carrying resentment. This balance allowed our relationship to evolve rather than simply reset. Fourth, that standing up for yourself can be the most loving thing you can do, not just for yourself, but sometimes for the very person you're standing up to. My confrontation gave Natalie the opportunity to see herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. Her growth afterward wouldn't have been possible without that difficult moment of truth. And finally, that family is indeed what we make it. The bonds of blood matter, but so do the choices we make daily in how we treat each other. True family supports without smothering, loves without exploiting, and grows through both conflict and reconciliation. Sometimes the family we create through friendship provides the foundation that allows us to repair the family we're born into. Today, my relationship with Natalie is different, more balanced, more honest, and in many ways, closer than before despite seeing each other less frequently. Bradley and I will likely never be close friends, but we've developed a mutual respect. I've found unexpected joy in my relationship with Elise, who understands both my loyalty to family and my need for self-protection. Most importantly, I've reclaimed my own narrative. I'm no longer just the reliable brother or the family safety net. I'm Owen, with my own dreams, boundaries, and worth. The journey hasn't been easy, but I'm grateful for where it's led me to a place of greater authenticity in all my relationships, starting with the relationship with myself. In my new condo, there's a framed photo of Natalie and me as kids, building that snowman after our parents' funeral. Beside it is a more recent picture, Natalie, Bradley, Elise, and me at a Red Sox game last month. Different times, different relationships, but the same core truth. Family is complicated, imperfect, and infinitely worth the effort it takes to get it right. So to anyone watching who recognizes themselves in this story, anyone who consistently puts others' needs above their own to the point of erasure, I hope you take this message to heart. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stand firmly in your own value, even when those closest to you fail to see it. The people who truly love you will eventually thank you for it. If you've experienced something similar with family or friends, drop a comment below and share your story. I read every comment and would love to hear how you handled it. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more real-life stories about family, boundaries, and personal growth, and give this video a thumbs up if it resonated with you. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thanks for listening, and remember, loving yourself is never selfish. It's essential.